Competing for influence in Central Asia, US President Donald Trump holds a summit with 5 leaders from the resource-rich region. He wants deals on critical minerals, trade and energy. But can Washington succeed in an area long dominated by Russia and where China is making inroads? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Nick Clark. So the race for access to Central Asia's natural resources is intensifying. US President Donald Trump has set his sights on the C5 nations, that's Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan and Tajikistan. He hosted a summit with their leaders at the White House and highlighted their country's unbelievable potential. Washington wants to get access to the mineral-rich region and reduce its reliance on China for critical minerals. But the leaders of the C5 face a delicate balancing act, make deals with the US without annoying Moscow or Beijing. The meeting in Washington came just a month after Russia's Vladimir Putin attended a summit with the C5. And earlier in the year, the Chinese president also met C5 leaders, hoping to maintain China's role in the region. So, can the US expand its influence in Central Asia? We'll put that to our guest shortly. But first, this report from Dmitry Medvedenko.
The leaders of nations from Central Asia gathered at the White House.
Outstanding bilateral meetings.
All 5 of them born in the Soviet Union. The former USSR republics of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan are now seeing increasing interest from China and the US, and this is one of the reasons.
One of the key items on our agenda is critical minerals. In recent weeks, my administration has strengthened American economic security by forging agreements with allies and friends across the world to broaden our critical mineral supply chain.
Central Asia is sandwiched between regional players Russia and China. The 5 countries have a combined population of 84 million people. Kazakhstan is the largest in size and economy, while Uzbekistan has the biggest population. China has recently surpassed Russia as the region's largest trading partner. Its trade amounted to nearly $100 billion with the C5 countries. Compare that to Russia's $50 billion and just $7 billion with the US. And Washington's interest is transparent. The region is rich in uranium, gold, copper, and rare earth elements. Kazakhstan is the world's largest uranium supplier. Together with Uzbekistan, the 2 countries produce half of the world's uranium, beneficial for Washington's growing energy needs. But trying to get into these industries would irritate Moscow, which sees this region as its backyard. Plus, Russian is widely spoken here, and millions of Central Asian workers migrate to Russia. Meanwhile, Beijing has been increasing its foothold in Central Asia with multi-billion-dollar investment projects. Donald Trump's hosting of Central Asian leaders comes just a week after his meeting with China's President Xi Jinping. China had been threatening to limit its exports of rare earths, so the region becomes that much important for the US. Dmitry Medvedenko, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
All right, we've set the scene. Let's bring in our guests now. In Astana, Zhumabek Sarabekov, Acting Director at the Institute of World Economics and Politics in Kazakhstan. In Washington, William Courtney, a former US ambassador to Kazakhstan and now Senior Fellow at the RAND Corporation. And in London, we welcome Dakota Irvin, who's a Senior Analyst at Prism Strategic Intelligence, which focuses on geopolitics, energy and capital markets in Eurasia. A very warm welcome to all of you. And Zhumabek, I'd like to start with you in Astana in Kazakhstan, if I may. As we just heard in Dmitry's piece, the chief reason for this interest is the wealth of resources, especially rare earths. But from the Central Asian perspective, is it just about economic cooperation? And what else do they stand to gain?
Actually, for Astana and Central Asian countries, it's an attempt to attract Western investment and expand partnership with Washington. We see that foreign policy of United States and the Trump administration is changing drastically, and we need to frame this new approach to the cooperation with the United States, and at the same time, it's an effort to maintain a geopolitical balance amid a growing geopolitical rivalry in our region. And we see that for the last years, Western attention to our region has decreased.
Indeed. So that rivalry is intense, isn't it, Zhumbek? Dakota, if I can bring you in at this as we kind of introduce the whole concept here. So Russia and China, of course, already heavily invested in the region, both economically and geopolitically. Dakota, what do you say to that?
You know, Russia has longstanding historical and cultural ties, and also quite a lot of economic interest in the region. Although we have seen recently that Russia has increasingly been unable to afford some of the larger investment projects. China, on the other hand, of course, a very close neighbor, very strong trading partner. But China is also looking to diversify its own supply chains before a potential geopolitical confrontation with the United States. That's why it's investing so much in the Middle Corridor.
Okay, Ambassador, for the United States, interests, as we've already established, is very much about resources. But what about the wider game, perhaps, of keeping Russia and China in check in the region?
The fundamental policy of the West after the Soviet Union collapsed was to support the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of all the states which have been part of the Soviet Union. And that remains a fundamental element of policy. The region is more stable, less likely to have conflicts if the territorial integrity of all the countries is respected. After Russia invaded Ukraine, a full-scale assault in 2022, this has made the situations more nervous about Russian ambitions. But because China and Russia both have strong interests in Central Asia, this balance has been a fairly effective aspect of Central Asian diplomacy, and that's something that the West supports.
Okay, and this balancing act is something we're going to look at now, particularly for the stans themselves, Zhumbek, to accept the American interest and American investment, but on the other hand, not to anger China and Russia, who've long dominated, as we've already discussed, dominated influence in the region.
Yeah, sure. I think both Russia and China, they take a very pragmatic view that all Central Asian countries, they are continuing its multilateral foreign policy, and cooperation with the Western countries, especially with the United States, is one of the core pillars of our foreign policy. And of course, we are also very realistic, and we understand that in terms of trade and investment, United States can hardly compete with China or Russia, especially with China, which has become an absolute leader in economic dialogue. For example, trade with the United States, between Kazakhstan and the United States, is amount it's $4 or $5 billion, and trade Kazakhstan trade with China is $42 billion. So it makes a difference.
Dakota, I saw you nodding in agreement there.
Yes, of course, there's no way that the United States is going to be able to compete at the kind of size and volume that China and even Russia have. But at the same time, I think that President Trump and his very transactional deal-making style is going to make real inroads and increase U.S. influence in the region. In the past, some of these countries might have faced questions about human rights issues or democratic backsliding. Now the focus is really on transactions, and the Central Asian leaders have very clearly recognized that deals, particularly on critical minerals, this is how to get Trump's attention, and I think that we'll continue to see his engagement going forward.
But it needs some deft navigation on all sides, doesn't it? How will it be, Dakota, for Russia and China as they observe what's going on here, Trump hosting the leaders of these five nations?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with China, I think we're going to see the continued investment, continued economic engagement, again, in preparation for a potential conflict or blockade with the United States. They're also going to use formats like the China Central Asia Summit that was mentioned, and also the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So China has many different levers, both economically and politically that they can pull. Russia is definitely, of course, has more to lose here because this is kind of the historic post-Soviet space. As I mentioned, we've seen some kind of limitations on Russian economic investment in the region. But at the same time, we have observed that Russia has actually increased its influence in the region since its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. I think we're going to likely see more attempts by the Kremlin to bring these countries politically closer. And we'll probably also see a rise in disinformation campaigns, kind of local Russian language attacks on Western interests in the region.
So, Ambassador, then, for the United States, this is both about the interest in resources, as particularly rare earths, but also geopolitically keeping things in check.
That's correct. So, as I mentioned at the very beginning, the West had the idea that supporting sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity would be best for Central Asia and actually best for China, Russia, and the whole world, because preventing conflict is a key priority for everyone. The United States has large oil companies. So soon after Kazakhstan became independent, Chevron and then Exxon invested quite substantial sums in oil. The concept for the United States is not that oil will necessarily come to the U.S., but that the more global supplies of oil that exist, the more routes to world markets that exist, is better for everyone because it lowers costs to consumers. And so the U.S. interest, the Western interest in critical minerals is very similar to that in oil. The critical minerals that come out of Central Asia, because the U.S. is far away, may not come to the United States, but they will add to global supplies, and that will be stabilizing for everyone.
Ambassador, if you were still ambassador in Astana, how would you be navigating this diplomatic arena, sort of walking this diplomatic tightrope and trying to present these deals, but yet not putting these nations into a situation where they're exclusive deals with the United States that mean that they have to sever ties with their current cooperation with Russia and China?
So the United States has always supported the Central Asian countries' efforts to maintain good relations with all of its neighbors, whether it's Russia, China, Turkey, others. So that policy, still makes a lot of sense. The United States does not seek to ask Central Asian countries to choose the United States or the West over China or Russia. Rather, all investors have opportunities there, and again, the more supplies for global markets, the better.
So, Zhumbek, from the stance point of view, what do they get out of this ultimately? I mean, most of the deals that were announced yesterday when Donald Trump met with the leaders involved Central Asian states buying products and services from US companies rather than American direct investment. So what is to be gained for nations like Kazakhstan from these latest deals?
Actually, after the meeting, we found out that we signed agreements, trade agreements, investment agreements, a combined value of $17 billion between Kazakhstan and the United States. It's a huge number, and especially I want to pay attention on the AI, on the agreements on AI, because we see that President Trump pays huge attention to AI and rare earth materials. And in terms of this matter, I think Kazakhstan can offer a lot to American investors. And we're also very interested in American presence, American economic presence here, because everyone acknowledges that besides all the recent developments, United States still the greatest power in the modern geopolitics, and Astana is really interested because without West, without United States, we will end up in tight embrace of China and Russia, and it's a huge risk for our sovereignty, geopolitical room for maneuvers. That I think Astana is genuinely interested in such economic projects with the United States.
Dakota, from a pure economic point of view, how important are these deals, not only with the United States, but also with China and Russia, and also with the EU, I should say, as far as these Central Asian nations are concerned in terms of economic growth?
Well, I think, as you pointed out, the deals were very one-sided. It was primarily Central Asian countries investing in the U.S. economy. And that's why I think viewing the C5+1 summit yesterday, it's necessary to view it through the lens of Trump's broader engagement with global allies, right? He's looking for investments in the U.S. economy, and he's also looking to secure the critical supply deals. I think one thing for the Central Asian countries, I mean, this was about getting Trump's attention, engaging with him, and signing these deals now so that in the future we could see additional investment projects. I'm reminded by how Trump engaged with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, in that first they wanted to sign the critical minerals deal at the beginning, and then after then we saw a resumption in the provision of military equipment for Ukraine's war against Russia. So I think that Central Asian leaders will view this meeting, even though it won't have a massive economic impact right now, in the long term, I think it opens the door for increased U.S. investment and engagement.
Right, Ambassador, what do you say to that?
Well, I think that's certainly the case, that there will be increased engagement from the United States and from the West as there are more opportunities for investment in Kazakhstan. And those investment projects will generally require that that the investors in Kazakhstan purchase equipment from the West. And so that has traditionally been something that has been important. For example, a U.S. company is going to be initiating a tungsten mining operation in Kazakhstan. That will require a lot of equipment. So the economic engagement, is really two-way between Central Asia and the West. And a key issue now with critical minerals is that the Chinese monopoly or oligopoly power is really more in the refining than in the extraction of the minerals from the ground. So the Kazakhstanis, Uzbeks, and others are going to be looking for a way to add value by having refining operations in their countries. And that will be helpful for Europe and the United States, because our environmental regulations in the West may be too difficult for those refining operations to take place.
Well, that just means that the dirty operations happen somewhere else, right?
Well, typically refining operations happen closer to the source of supply, because refining involves separating out a lot of stuff that isn't really what you're trying to refine. And so rather than ship all that to some distant location, doing the refining in Central Asia would make a lot of sense for most things.
Right. Zhimenbek, I just want to come back to the Russian point of view about this, and how Moscow will be viewing it, and how that is seen in Astana, and how much they do not want Western interests in their backyard from a Russian point of view, because these were all former Soviet states. There are significant cultural ties and a destination for many millions of migrant workers who earn money and send it home.
Actually, I think Moscow, also China, they already get used to Astana's multi-vector foreign policy, because in the context of Ukrainian war, for example, Astana declared that it supports Ukrainian territorial integrity, and we don't recognize occupied new territories that Russia claims as a new territories. So I think our partners get used to our for multi-vector foreign policy, and Astana's position is very open and very constructive, because, as I said before, we have to maintain our geopolitical balance between its core pillars of our foreign policy, and there is no surprise for our colleagues in Beijing and Moscow.
Dakota, on this, last month President Putin was in Tajikistan to strengthen military cooperation between the two nations. What is the view in the Kremlin about the United States trying to put through these deals and to have greater influence on geopolitics in the region?
Well, I think the Tajikistan meeting is very interesting, in fact, because at that we witnessed Tajik President Emomali dress down Putin and accuse him of disrespecting Tajikistan and the Central Asia region and demanding more respect. So again, we can see that there might be the sense within the Kremlin that the region is slipping away a bit. But of course, members Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan are members of the Russia-led military alliance. Security ties are very strong. President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev was really saved by the Russians during the Kantar uprising and attempted coup in January 2022. So there's a lot of strong security ties there. And I don't think those are going to go away necessarily. This conflict now has really moved on to the economic sphere. And Russia will be aware that it really can't compete with some of the major U.S. companies, particularly after the U.S. sanctioned oil majors Rosneft and Lukoil. And Lukoil is involved in several of the major oil and gas projects in Kazakhstan. And the future of that involvement is very much under question right now, which is certainly going to be an issue for the Kazakhs as well as the Russians.
Okay, now how are they likely to take that on, do you think?
Well, I think what we're going to see, the main project that's under threat has not been developed yet. It's in the Kalam-Khazar Sea, where Lukoil has a 50% stake in the local entity. So that is sanctioned right now. We'll probably see Lukoil move under 50%. But there's the possibility that they might exit some of the major U.S.-led projects in Tengiz and Karachaganak, which are led by the U.S. IOCs, just because of the difficulty of managing financial payments and things like that. And I think that ultimately China could be a major beneficiary of this, as they've been looking to enter into Kazakhstan's energy sector and the major projects for several years now. And if Lukoil withdraws, it could be an opportunity for Beijing.
So, Ambassador, in international diplomacy, as you know only too well, everyone is always triple guessing everybody else. So how will the United States, do you think, be calculating Russia and China's likely maneuvering around this?
The United States and the West are both really interested in trying to encourage good relations between all the countries. No one wants to see a country use military aggression in Central Asia, for example, or to see the use of economic pressure that reduces the opportunities for the countries of the region. This is why it's important that the countries be able to have strong sovereignty and independence. That's the best long-term solution for the region. And the other aspect of that, too, for the long term is the region is democratic development has not really taken place much in Central Asia. And so the West is concerned that this could leave the region more vulnerable to political disruption. So over the longer term, I think the West believes that Central Asia would do better for itself if it allowed some democratic development.
Right, and presumably, from Astana's point of view, Zhumanbek, that's something that would be welcomed, of course.
Of course, and current administration in Kazakhstan, President Tokayev, he declared a lot of political reforms, and as you know, we planning to make a parliamentary reform the next year, and I think we understand the expectation of the West in terms of human rights and democratic reforms, and Central Asian countries. They have to take into account the Western position, because West is one of the main economic partners and geopolitical allies, and it's also an internal willing of Central Asian countries to make reforms, because without reforms there will be a lot of problems in terms of internal policy, and we faced it already. So I think it's a willingness for Central Asian countries also.
Dakota, there is one nation that's outside of the C5, and that is Azerbaijan. But there is talk of making it C5 plus 2 by including Azerbaijan. For the US to engage successfully with Central Asian states, it does need help from Baku, right?
Absolutely. And there's been a lot of regional integration led by countries like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan to integrate Azerbaijan into the kind of a greater Caspian region. Of course, the U.S. has major economic interests with oil and gas companies operating in Azerbaijan as well. But we've seen this increased engagement in the region, in the Caucasus region, from the U.S. through Donald Trump's effort to secure a peace agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and particularly the Trump Road for International Peace, the TRIP corridor. So I think this is part of a broader framework that they're engaging with the region, but I think it makes sense logically to include Azerbaijan, given the kind of deep economic and cultural ties it has with Central Asia.
Okay, Ambassador, two final questions for you. A US military base, not an immediate possibility right now or even in the medium term, but in the long term, is that something that might be something that makes sense to the United States? And secondly, what about a presidential visit to the region? US Secretaries of State make random occasional visits to nations in Central Asia, but that's about it. Do you think we could see President Trump making a visit?
With regard to military base, the U.S. has no plans for a military base in Central Asia, and there's no prospect that that will happen. After 9/11, the United States made temporary use of Uzbekistani and Kyrgyzstani facilities, and then as Afghanistan war drew down, pulled out from that. But there's no desire in the U.S. and no need for a permanent military base in Central Asia. With regard to presidential visits, it's hard for the U.S. president to travel a lot of places. In the past, for example, President Clinton hosted every one of the Central Asian presidents in Washington, and he hosted President Nazarbayev 3 times in Washington during Clinton's 2 terms in office. So there's been a lot of, over the years, a fair amount of presidential level involvement.
All right, it'll be fascinating to see how the push and pull of geopolitics in this important region develops. Gentlemen, thanks very much indeed. Zhuenbek Zarabakov, William Courtney, and Dakota Irvin, thanks very much indeed. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again at any time by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Nick Clark, and the entire team here in Doha, it's goodbye for now.